There is a version of this story that sounds impossible. A woman receives a cancer diagnosis on a Tuesday and anchors the morning show on Wednesday. She hears words that would silence most people forever, and her first instinct is to sit down in front of a camera and say, "Good morning," not because she is performing courage, not because the lights demand it, but because showing up, in spite of everything, through everything, against everything, is the only language she has ever truly spoken. Her name is Robin Roberts, and for more than 3 decades, she has been the most trusted voice in American morning television. 64 years old, co-anchor of Good Morning America, the broadcast that, under her presence, finally broke the Today Show's 16-year winning streak and never looked back. A 2-time cancer survivor, a woman who faced not one, but 2 diagnoses that should have ended everything, and returned each time not diminished, but expanded. A sports Emmy recipient, a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, a woman who has sat across from presidents, pop icons, and grieving families alike, and made every single one of them feel seen. But behind that extraordinary legacy lies a story that is not glamorous. It is devastating, real, and profoundly human. Because before the studio lights, before the teleprompters and the red carpet interviews, before the awards and the magazine covers, there was a little girl in Pass Christian, Mississippi, who learned something that no television contract can teach you: that showing up matters more than being ready, that the most powerful thing a person can do on the hardest day of their life is simply continue. She would need that lesson more than once. She would need it in ways she could not have imagined, and this is the story of how she used it. Every single time. If Robin Roberts has ever made you feel like morning was worth getting up for, hit like as tribute to the woman who showed up, no matter what was waiting for her. It is something worth pausing over, that the origin of one of the most celebrated careers in American broadcasting is not a story of luck or privilege, but of a girl from the Gulf Coast who simply refused to stop moving forward. Robin Renee Roberts was born on November 23, 1960, in Tuskegee, Alabama, but it was Pass Christian, Mississippi, a small, salt-aired town pressed against the Gulf Coast, that made her. Her father, Lawrence Roberts, was not simply a man who served his country. He was one of the original Tuskegee Airmen, among the first black military pilots in American history, men who flew combat missions during World War II at a time when the nation they were defending had not yet decided to grant them full citizenship. Lawrence Roberts carried that history in his posture, in his silence, in the standard he set for every person who lived under his roof. Excellence was not optional. It was the price of belonging to that family. Her mother, Lucy Marion, was equally formidable. A woman of deep faith, quiet authority, and a saying she repeated so often that it became the architecture of her daughter's life. Everybody's got something. Not as resignation, as orientation, as a way of moving through the world without using pain as an excuse to stop. Robin was the youngest of 4 children. She grew up watching her siblings navigate that household, watching what discipline looked like when it came from love, watching what faith looked like when it was practiced rather than performed. The Gulf Coast outside her window was beautiful and vulnerable in equal measure, and she absorbed both qualities. From the beginning, she was an athlete, not casually, ferociously. Tennis, basketball, track. She competed with the same focus her father brought to everything, and sport became the first place she understood what her body was capable of, what she was capable of. Long before a camera ever pointed in her direction, Robin Roberts was learning the thing that would define her entire career: how to perform at your highest level precisely when the pressure is at its worst. Pass Christian was a small place, but small places, when they are shaped by people of that quality, leave large marks. She would carry it with her, all the way to the top. Robin Roberts arrived at Southeastern Louisiana University not as a television personality in waiting, but as an athlete with a plan. She played basketball for the Lady Lions, and she played it well enough that the court became her first real classroom in what it meant to compete under pressure, to lead without being asked, and to absorb a loss without letting it become an identity. She graduated in 1983 with a degree in communications, and she carried both things with her when she left: the broadcaster's instinct and the athlete's refusal to quit. Her first job was not glamorous. It was WDMM-TV in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, a local station, small market, the kind of posting that tells you everything about how far someone is willing to travel before the destination arrives. She reported, she anchored, she learned the machinery of live television from the inside out. Then came WLOX in Biloxi, then Nashville, then Atlanta. Each move was not a promotion so much as a recalibration. A woman testing the edges of her own range, pushing into larger markets with the same quiet ferocity she had once brought to the basketball court. What she understood, even then, was something that most people in television spend careers trying to manufacture. She was not performing warmth. She was transmitting it. The camera did not create her presence. It simply confirmed what was already there. In 1988, ESPN came calling. She joined the network as a sportscaster at a moment when the landscape for women in sports broadcasting was not merely competitive. It was resistant. The industry had not yet decided what to do with a black woman who knew the game as well as any man in the room and delivered it better than most. Robin Roberts did not wait for the industry to decide. She simply continued to be undeniable. For 15 years at ESPN, she covered the National Basketball Association, the National Football League, college football, Wimbledon, the Olympics. She anchored Sports Center. She reported from sidelines and press boxes and studios and arenas. And in every single one of those environments, she brought the same quality that would later define her work on morning television. She made the person watching feel like the story mattered. Because to her, it always did. In 1995, ABC took notice. She was brought in as a contributor to Good Morning America. And what began as an addition to the roster became, over the years, something far larger. By 2005, she was named co-anchor alongside Diane Sawyer. The little girl from Pass Christian, Mississippi, was now sitting at the most prominent morning desk in American television. And the numbers confirmed what the audience already felt. Under her presence, Good Morning America grew. It deepened. It became something that millions of Americans structured their mornings around. Not because it was slick, but because it was true. Because Robin Roberts looked into the camera with the same honesty her mother had modeled at the kitchen table, and people recognized it. In 2012, Good Morning America broke the Today Show's winning streak. 16 consecutive years of dominance ended. The broadcast that Robin Roberts had helped build had become the most watched morning program in the country. She received the news of that milestone on the same day she received another piece of news entirely. One was about a record. The other was about her blood. What does it mean when the greatest professional triumph of your life arrives on the same morning as the worst news of your health? And you still have to sit down and anchor the show? It did not begin in 2012. It began 5 years earlier, in the summer of 2007, when Robin Roberts was 46 years old, at the height of her career, and a routine mammogram returned results that were not routine at all. Breast cancer. The words landed the way those words always land, with a weight that reorganizes everything around them. The future, which had seemed like a straight line, suddenly became a question. The career, the schedule, the morning calls and the broadcast rhythms and the ordinary machinery of a life built over decades, all of it paused in an instant while those two words settled into place. What Robin Roberts did next is the thing that tells you everything about who she is. She told her Good Morning America audience herself, not through a publicist, not through a carefully managed press release distributed to selected outlets after the news cycle had already begun to move. She sat down at that desk, the same desk she had occupied every morning, the same desk that millions of Americans associated with the beginning of their day. And she looked into the camera, and she told the truth. She was 46 years old. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer. She was going to fight it, and she was going to do so in public, because she believed, with the same conviction her mother had given her, that somebody watching needed to hear it. She later admitted that the decision was not entirely without fear. "I was scared," she confessed in interviews that followed. "But I knew if I was scared, somebody at home was scared too. And maybe if they saw me do this, they'd go get their mammogram." She underwent a lumpectomy, then radiation. She managed her treatment around her broadcast schedule with a discipline that her colleagues found both inspiring and quietly staggering. Because what Robin Roberts was doing, in the most literal sense, was refusing to let the disease define the calendar. She would not disappear. She would not retreat. She would show up. And she did. Through fatigue that most people would have used as permission to stop. Through the particular indignity of a body being remade by treatment. Through all of it, she showed up. The response from her audience was extraordinary. Letters arrived by the thousands. Women wrote to say they had scheduled mammograms after watching her announcement. Women wrote to say they had received early diagnoses because of those appointments. Women wrote to say that watching Robin Roberts sit in that chair and refuse to be diminished had given them something they could not name but desperately needed. She had turned her diagnosis into a message, and that instinct to take the worst thing that was happening to her and convert it into something useful for someone else was not a strategy she invented in the moment. It was the natural extension of everything Lucy Marion Roberts had ever taught her. Everybody's got something. And if everybody's got something, then the question is not whether the hard thing will come. It will. The question is what you choose to do with it when it arrives. Robin Roberts chose to make it mean something beyond herself. By 2008, she had completed treatment. She had spoken publicly about the experience in ways that moved the national conversation around breast cancer screening in measurable, documented directions. She returned to Good Morning America not merely as a broadcaster, but as something the audience now understood differently. She was not just the woman who read the news. She was someone who had lived through something real and come back to the desk anyway. The career continued. The ratings grew. The trust deepened. And Robin Roberts allowed herself, carefully, to believe that the hardest chapter was behind her. She was not wrong to believe it. She was simply unaware that something else was already forming. Quietly, in the architecture of her own blood. That would ask far more of her than the first diagnosis ever had. What happens when the body that carried you through one fight, the body you trusted, the body you rebuilt, turns out to be preparing a second battle that makes the first one look like a rehearsal? The date was June 11th, 2012. It was, by any professional measure, one of the greatest days in the history of Good Morning America. The ratings had just confirmed what the team had been building toward for years. The broadcast had officially surpassed the Today Show in viewership, ending 16 consecutive years of dominance by their rival. 16 years. The staff celebrated. The network celebrated. It was the kind of milestone that careers are measured by, the kind of number that gets framed and hung on walls. Robin Roberts sat with the news of that victory for exactly as long as it took for the other news to arrive. Her doctors had been monitoring her blood. The chemotherapy she had received during her breast cancer treatment in 2007 carried, as some chemotherapy does, a rare but documented secondary risk: damage to the bone marrow. What they found, 5 years later, was a condition called myelodysplastic syndrome, known in medical shorthand as MDS, a disease of the bone marrow in which the body's blood cell production begins to fail, and which, left untreated, carries consequences that are not abstract. She was 51 years old. The treatment required was a bone marrow transplant, not a procedure to be scheduled around a broadcast calendar, not something that could be managed with the disciplined accommodation she had applied to radiation in 2007. A bone marrow transplant meant removing herself from the air entirely. It meant months of isolation, of immunosuppression, of a body stripped deliberately down to its most vulnerable state before being rebuilt. It meant, in every clinical and human sense of the word, starting over. Once again, she told her audience herself. Once again, she sat at that desk, the desk that had become, over nearly 2 decades, an extension of who she was. And she looked into the camera, and she told the truth. She was sick. She was going to fight. And she needed a bone marrow donor. The response was immediate and national. Donor registration surged. The Be the Match registry reported record sign-ups in the days following her announcement. She had done it again, taken the most private and frightening moment of her life, and converted it, almost instinctively, into a public act of service. But the donor she needed was not a stranger. It was her sister. Sally Ann Roberts, Robin's older sister, also a broadcaster, a woman who had built her own distinguished career in New Orleans television, was tested and found to be a compatible match. She said yes, without hesitation. She later described the decision in terms so simple they were devastating. "She's my sister." There was nothing to decide. What Sally Ann gave Robin Roberts in that moment was not merely biological material. It was the continuation of a life. And Robin has never spoken about it since, without a quality in her voice that sits somewhere between gratitude and awe. The particular emotional register of someone who understands completely what they were given. The transplant was scheduled. Robin Roberts stepped away from Good Morning America in September of 2012. She would be gone for nearly 6 months. What happened during those months was not televised. The isolation was profound. The treatment was grueling in ways that are difficult to communicate from the outside. A body made deliberately fragile, an immune system reset to zero, days of extraordinary physical difficulty inside a hospital room while the world continued moving at its ordinary pace beyond the window. The woman who had built her entire adult life around the discipline of showing up was now required, for the first time, to simply wait, to surrender to a process she could not anchor or narrate or manage through force of will. And in the middle of that waiting, her mother died. Lucy Marion Roberts, the woman whose voice had given Robin her moral architecture, whose saying had become the foundation of her entire approach to suffering, passed away in August of 2012 at the age of 88, while her youngest daughter was preparing for the most dangerous medical procedure of her life. The timing was the kind that has no adequate language. Robin Roberts has spoken about her mother's death with a tenderness that makes it clear the loss did not diminish with time. It simply changed shape. Lucy Marion did not live to see her daughter walk back into that studio. She did not see the recovery completed. But what she had given Robin, The theology of everybody's got something, the faith that suffering is not a sign of abandonment but a condition of being human, that traveled into the hospital room with her daughter and did not leave. She got through the worst months of her life carrying her mother's voice inside her, in a room where her mother could no longer come. What do you do with a grief that arrives precisely when you have nothing left, and you still have to find a way to survive the morning? The transplant worked. Those 3 words carry more weight than they appear to, because a bone marrow transplant is not a procedure with guaranteed outcomes. It is a calculated wager against extraordinary odds, a medical intervention so demanding on the human body that the recovery period is measured not in weeks, but in months, and the markers of success arrive slowly, cautiously, 1 blood count at a time. Robin Roberts' body accepted her sister's marrow. The process was not linear. There were difficult days inside that hospital room, days of profound physical exhaustion, of a body fighting to integrate something new, of the particular psychological weight that arrives when the life you have built is entirely on pause and entirely out of your control. The woman who had anchored morning television for nearly 2 decades, who had delivered the news through hurricanes and national tragedies and the ordinary daily texture of American life, was now in a position that no amount of professional preparation could address. She was waiting to find out if she would live. What she did during that time was, characteristically, refuse to be only a patient. She wrote. She reflected. She began to articulate, in the privacy of that enforced stillness, what she believed about suffering and purpose, and the specific obligation she felt, the one that had driven her to announce both diagnoses publicly, to convert her private pain into communal resource. She was not manufacturing a message. She was excavating one, pulling from the experience something that could be handed to someone else who needed it. Her colleagues at Good Morning America visited. Her partner was there. Her faith, which had been a steady current beneath her entire life, inherited from parents who treated spiritual practice as something you did rather than something you declared, held. And then, on February 20th, 2013, Robin Roberts walked back into the Good Morning America studio. The broadcast that morning has become one of the most watched moments in the program's history. Not because anything extraordinary was said, but because of what the image itself communicated. The woman who had been absent for nearly 6 months, who had survived 2 cancers and a bone marrow transplant, and the death of her mother inside the same terrible season, sat down at that desk, looked into the camera, and said good morning. The audience wept. Her colleagues wept. George Stephanopoulos, seated beside her, could barely speak. Robin Roberts did not weep. She smiled, the specific smile of someone who has paid a very high price for the right to be in a particular room, and knows it, and is not going to waste a single second of it. She later reflected on the return with characteristic precision. "I always say, make your mess your message," she told interviewers in the months that followed. "And I had a big mess, so I figured I had a big message." That phrase, "make your mess your message," became something larger than a personal motto. It traveled. It was repeated by cancer patients and their families, by people in the middle of recoveries that had nothing to do with illness, by anyone who had ever stood at the edge of something devastating and needed a framework for what came next. Robin Roberts had not invented the idea, but she had embodied it with such completeness, in such public view, that she had given it new weight. The career resumed. The ratings held. But something had shifted in the way her audience related to her, because now they knew, with specificity, what it had cost her to be in that chair. They had watched her absence. They had followed the updates. They had sent the letters and the prayers and the donor registrations, They had, in some sense, participated in her survival, and she understood that. What Robin Roberts had discovered, through 2 diagnoses, a transplant, the death of her mother, and 6 months of enforced stillness, was something that the athlete in her had always known but never had to apply at this scale. That the capacity to return is not the same as the capacity to perform. Performing is about what you can do. Returning is about who you have become. She had become someone who knew, with a certainty, that no amount of professional success could have given her exactly why she was in that chair. Not for the ratings, not for the career milestone, not even for the broadcast itself. She was there because someone at home was scared. Because someone watching was in the middle of their own impossible season and needed to see that the desk was still there, and the morning was still worth getting up for, and the person across from them had been through something real and come back anyway. That was the message. That had always been the message. She had simply needed the mess to make it visible. What does it mean to have survived everything, and to realize that survival itself was never the point? There is a version of Robin Roberts' story that ends with the return to the desk in February of 2013. The triumphant image, the tears from her colleagues, the audience exhaling after months of collective holding of breath. That version is complete and true and genuinely moving. But it is not the whole story. Because what happened after the return was not simply a resumption of the career. It was the beginning of a different kind of life. One in which Robin Roberts, having survived what she survived, began to live with a deliberateness and an openness that the years before the diagnoses had not fully allowed. In December of 2013, she came out publicly as a gay woman. She did it the way she had done everything consequential in her public life. Not with a press conference or a manufactured announcement, but quietly. In a Facebook post at the end of the year, in which she expressed gratitude for the people who had supported her through her recovery. Among them, she named Amber Lane, her partner of then 10 years, and thanked her for the love and care she had provided through the most difficult period of Robin's life. The response was, once again, extraordinary. Not because the revelation was scandalous, it was not, but because of what it confirmed about the kind of person Robin Roberts had always been. She had not hidden Amber out of shame. She had maintained privacy out of the same instinct that governed everything else in her life. The belief that what she shared publicly should serve a purpose beyond herself. When she decided that sharing this part of her life could be useful, could offer something to someone watching who needed to see it, she shared it. Amber Lane had been there through both cancer diagnoses. She had been there through the bone marrow transplant, through the months of isolation, through the death of Lucimarian Roberts. She had been, in the most concrete and unglamorous sense, present. For the fear, for the physical difficulty, for the long and non-linear work of recovery. She was not the partner of Robin Roberts, the television icon. She was the partner of Robin Roberts, the person. And that distinction, to anyone paying attention, was everything. Their relationship continued to deepen in the years that followed. And then, in 2021, Amber received her own diagnosis: breast cancer. The woman who had cared for Robin through 2 cancer treatments was now navigating her own. Robin Roberts did not leave. She showed up, with the specific competence of someone who understood, from the inside, what that road required. Amber completed her treatment. She recovered. In 2023, Robin Roberts and Amber Lane were married. In a private ceremony, surrounded by the people who had been present through everything. Robin was 62 years old. It had taken 20 years of partnership, 2 cancer battles between them, A bone marrow transplant, the death of a parent, and the full weight of a shared life to arrive at that moment. It was not a fairy tale. It was something more durable than a fairy tale. In 2025, Robin Roberts turned 64. She and Amber celebrated in Rwanda, a journey that carried its own layers of meaning in a country whose modern story is one of the most extraordinary acts of collective reconstruction in recent human history. They maintained by then separate apartments in New York, an arrangement Robin has spoken about with characteristic directness, describing it not as a sign of distance, but as a recognition of what two people with full lives and individual rhythms actually need to sustain a real partnership across decades. She had arrived at 64, not diminished, but clarified. The career was still there. Good Morning America was still there. The desk, the morning light, the camera, all of it still there. But the woman sitting in that chair understood something about the difference between a life performed and a life actually lived that she could not have understood at 30 or 40 or even 50. She had been given back her mornings, twice, at enormous cost. And she had decided, with full awareness of what that gift had required, to be present for every single one of them. Not for the ratings, not for the record, not even for the message, though the message continued to travel wherever it was needed. For Amber, for the memory of Lucimarian, for the girl from Pass Christian who had learned, before she had language for it, that showing up was the whole thing. It always had been. There is a question that Robin Roberts has been asked, in various forms, across decades of interviews, profiles, and public conversations. It arrives in different language depending on who is asking, but it is always, at its core, the same question. How do you keep going? And her answer, every single time, traces back to the same place. Not to resilience as a concept, not to professional discipline or broadcast training or the particular armor that public life can provide. It traces back to a kitchen in Pass Christian, Mississippi, and a woman named Lucimarian Roberts who looked at the full, complicated, often painful texture of human existence and said, "Everybody's got something." That is the whole philosophy. That is the entire framework. Not that suffering is acceptable, or that difficulty should be endured without protest, but that the presence of hard things in a life is not evidence that the life has gone wrong. It is simply evidence that the life is real. And real lives, the ones worth living, the ones that leave something behind, are built not in the absence of hard things, but in the daily decision to continue moving through them. Robin Roberts has made that decision more times than most people will ever be asked to. She made it on a Tuesday in 2007, when a diagnosis arrived, and she chose to anchor the show on Wednesday. She made it in June of 2012, when the greatest professional triumph of her career arrived on the same day as the most frightening medical news of her life. She made it in a hospital room in the fall of 2012, carrying her mother's voice in a place her mother could no longer reach. She made it on February 20th, 2013, when she sat back down at that desk and said good morning as though the word still meant something. Because to her, it did. She has made it every morning since. At 64, Robin Roberts is not a survivor in the passive sense, a person to whom things happened, and who managed to endure them. She is something more active than that, more intentional. She is a woman who took everything that was given to her, the good and the devastating in equal measure, and decided, repeatedly and deliberately, to make it mean something beyond herself. That is the legacy. Not the ratings record, not the Presidential Medal of Freedom, not the Emmy or the decades at the desk, or any of the monuments the industry has built in her honor. The legacy is the woman who called your name every morning, from whatever she was carrying and reminded you that the day was worth beginning. If this story moved you, leave a tribute for Robin Roberts in the comments below. Tell us, what does showing up look like in your own life? And if you believe that stories like this one deserve to be told, subscribe to Golden Fame News. We will be here every time to tell them.